Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Burn Your Draft, the podcast exploring the Reed College senior thesis process. I'm Ace Lackey, your podcast producer. In today's episode, Avis Correa returns, interviewing Rhiannon Weakley. Listen in to hear about gardening, juvenile justice, and changing lives.
My name is Rhiannon Weakley. I am from Pittsburgh, North Carolina. I majored in psychology and double minored in French and linguistics. The title of my thesis is Planting the Seeds of Belonging, Restorative Justice and Therapeutic Horticulture with Justice-Involved Youths. And my thesis advisor was Dr. Jennifer Henderlong-Corpus.
Restorative justice and horticulture, wow, like two things that I would have never thought to bridge together. So can you tell us more? Like, what's the context of your thesis?
About a little over a year ago, I started an internship with Multnomah County in a gardening program at the Juvenile Justice Complex in Northeast Portland. Essentially what that is the kids show up on the weekends. They're either on parole, probation, or a diversion, which are just like different kinds of directions that the court has sent them in. And we teach them about restorative justice. And then we get out into the garden and we teach them how to garden. And it's really beneficial to them for a lot of reasons. So I started working this internship and I got pretty obsessed with it. And then by the time that my thesis came around, I decided to look at their sense of community and belonging, essentially, because while I was working this job, I noticed how many of them were commenting on how they feel a lot of community, and gardening is like you forming a relationship with a plant, with nature, with yourself. And restorative justice is all about building community. So I wanted to look at how the program would, if it would, have an impact on their sense of belonging.
And is this a program that already existed? Like you were just another member of the program or like a person that aided in the process of the program, or did you introduce this program?
It's been a program for, I don't actually know how long now, but I was one of two interns. There's interns every year. I highly recommend to anyone that they should apply for Multnomah County College 2 County internship. Pays really well. You meet a lot of really cool people. Really good experience. Basically changed my life.
Oh, tell us more. How did it change your life?
I never really thought that I would be working at a juvie or like in a jail setting. I always kind of thought I would just end up being a therapist or a social worker, but not in like a jail setting. I don't know. But then I started working there and became really touched by all of the people I met, the staff, and especially the youths and their families. And my dear friend and mentor and former boss, Jerry Hunter. It became an obsession, and then it became my thesis obsession. Now it's probably going to be my career path for the foreseeable future.
And maybe I kind of missed this at the beginning. Do you think maybe we could define what is restorative justice?
So restorative justice is essentially a philosophy that has been practiced for centuries by indigenous communities. And then I think in the 70s, started gaining popularity in criminal justice procedures. And at its core, it's essentially opposed to retributive justice, which is basically our current carceral system, where crime is sort of framed as something that is against the state. It is a violation of legality, versus in restorative justice, crime is something against your community, the violation of relationships. Retributive justice, it basically ignores the root causes of crime. It creates cycles of crime because it's punishment-based. It causes labeling, where people are labeled as criminals or bad kids, and that causes isolation. And it causes a lot of harm to educational and employment opportunities, which continues that cycle. Versus restorative justice immediately tries to address the causes and support desistance or like stopping crime. And it's healing based, it promotes community, and it's empirically shown to reduce reoffense. So what that can look like basically is, there's a lot of ways to do it, but one way that happens is what's called a victor-offender mediation. And I don't actually like to use the words victim and offender because that is a label, and labeling can be pretty dangerous in my opinion. But it's when the person who caused the crime and the person, they have a conversation and they say, hey, it really hurt me that you graffitied my car. I want money for it. And then the person who graffitied the car can say, I don't have money. What if I paint you a picture of your dog? And then they paint a picture of the dog, and then they're both a lot happier without having to actually enter into the system and become trapped in the system.
So it sounds like there's elements, yeah, law elements in your thesis. It sounds very like interdisciplinary. Would you say so?
Yeah, definitely. It was sort of an unorthodox thesis to do, I think. Thank goodness Jennifer was kind enough to undertake my sort of wild idea thesis and help me with it really a lot.
I'm kind of wondering what you mentioned that this is like the restorative justice doctrine kind of comes from Indigenous communities. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about this?
It's been practiced, to my knowledge, by a lot of communities sort of all throughout the world, but there's been a lot of research into New Zealand, for instance. It's been documented as having been practiced there for a long, long time. And then in New Zealand's the best case I know of, but for a while in like the 1900s, New Zealand became more retributive, and in 1989, largely due to Aboriginals, decided to reform juvenile justice so that restorative justice was the default. Like as soon as a kid commits a crime, then they go straight to restorative justice programs instead of going to the court. Court processing becomes the backup. And since they've done that, youth offenses have decreased by 2/3, which is kind of like a mind-boggling statistic given what it looks like in the US right now.
So is this something that's being practiced all over the States, or is it something that is specifically being practiced in the Multnomah County?
To my knowledge, it's slowly increasing in being practiced all over the US, some places more than others, as you can kind of expect. It's all about policymaking and what different jails are sort of willing to do. I know that Portland, or maybe it's Oregon as a whole, but Portland especially, a bunch of programs like this right now. And I highly recommend looking into it, actually. Just Google Measure 11, and there's a whole bunch of information. Recent changes to juvenile justice in the county. But essentially, it's in Multnomah County, at least, it's a little bit less of an immediate thing where kids go and become incarcerated immediately. They have a lot more options for diversion. There's informal diversion, and then there's formal diversion. And informal diversion basically is like a parole officer ignoring that a kid missed a curfew, or a police officer giving a warning, something like that. But formal diversion is really being implemented in Multnomah County right now. So kids are being, instead of being incarcerated or sent to court, they're being put into restorative justice programs, culinary programs, stuff like that. And it's, I think, helping a lot.
What did like an average day as an intern look like for you? Like you mentioned horticulture as part of your thesis. Like how does that play in?
So I guess to define therapeutic horticulture real quick, it's essentially a non-clinical rehabilitative intervention. It can look very different depending on where this intervention is happening, but I'd say pretty globally, it emphasizes connection and healing and personal growth. When applied in juvenile justice, or I guess justice context at all, it often serves as vocational and social training. So you learn how to weed or prune shrubs or grow food, how to use power tools, stuff like that, all which can be applied in a vocational setting. And socially, because you have to work together if you're doing it as a group in the garden. And it's also been shown to improve behavior, communication, collaboration, self-esteem, well-being. And there's a couple of studies that have correlated therapeutic horticulture programs with reduced recidivism, which is committing a crime again, in really high-risk offenders. So a day in the garden would basically be that we all show up, we feed the kids breakfast, and then we sit in a circle and have a check-in about how everyone's doing, what's going on in their lives, what we're going to do today, talk about restorative justice, and then we go out into the garden, we plant things, we weed things, we water things, and there's a lot of metaphors with the garden that are sort of, that I think speak to the kids quite a lot, where like we're watering this plant and caring for it, and you are the plant, so you have to like care for yourself and pay attention to yourself and make sure you're getting enough water and sunlight and nutrition. And then you can grow and blossom and fruit or whatever. And it's also an organic farm, I believe, or a garden. So we don't use pesticides, which is often used as a metaphor for sobriety, because a lot of these kids struggle with substance abuse. And then we go inside for lunch. We do more talking in a circle. We talk more about restorative justice. And motivating them to stay in school, go back to school, get a job, whatever it is. And then we garden some more and then they leave. And it's a 6-week program only on the weekends.
Why did you choose Reed, and why did you choose your major and your minor?
Coming from North Carolina, I had not really heard of Reed at all. And then I found out about it and was also applying to way too many other schools. I think my two biggest criteria for choosing a school were a good study abroad program and good financial aid. And Reed by far beat all of the other schools at both of those. And also I wanted to get out of North Carolina, so it was a plus for that too. So yeah, I flew out across the country in the middle of a pandemic, and it was a really good choice. And then I don't know when I decided to be a psychology major. I feel like somewhere during my senior year, I had a lot of really great therapists and mentors growing up who were psychology oriented. And I think at some point I stopped wanting to be an English major and wanted to do something that would help people and heal people in the way that I had received when I really needed it. And for a while, I thought that was going to look like being a therapist, and maybe it still will, but I've decided that for now, the people who really need it are kids who are justice involved.
Tell me, what did an average workday of working on your thesis look like for you?
Like I kind of mentioned, my thesis definitely became like an obsession. So I would spend really long days in the library sitting at my thesis desk. If I had class, I would get out of class and then go straight to the library and stay there for sometimes like 12 hours a day. And I had all my snacks and my caffeine, and I would have friends come visit me and work next to me for a little while. But it was a lot of being in the library, unless I was doing data entry, because I received my data from Multnomah County. So I had to enter it digitally off of paper surveys and questionnaires that they had. So I would be in the office in a cubicle entering like so many data points. And that was also a really long process.
But it seems like the passion really pushed you forward every time.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a good call to choose a thesis that I was really personally and emotionally invested in, because on the weekends I would go to work and be at work, and then during the week I would be writing my thesis. So it very much became a 24/7 sort of experience for me, which I think made my thesis a lot better than it would have been if I wasn't super emotionally invested. But that's also just how I work. If I'm passionate about something, I'm going to give it everything I have. And if I'm not, then it's harder to stay focused on it.
Did you run into any unexpected challenges while working on your thesis?
Yeah, so in my thesis, I used two kinds of data. I used survey data where kids were answering on a Likert scale, things like agree, disagree, I am actively connected to my community, I feel confident that I can get a job, stuff like that. So those were just surveys. And I originally wanted to focus on the quantitative data and use the surveys. But then Multnomah County reorganized their offices or something and then lost a bunch of data. My sample size ended up being much smaller than I had anticipated. But I shifted from focusing on the survey data to focusing on these qualitative questionnaires that the youths filled out, answering questions like, what was the best part of your day? How are you feeling? What will you remember from today? And that actually, I think, ended up being the best part of my thesis, because it got to really showcase the kids or the youth's experiences in their own words, rather than just them trying to answer some sort of survey, which might not have measured exactly how they feel very well. So I'm really glad, actually, that data was lost. But it was a cause of a lot of stress for like a couple weeks.
You were very emotionally invested in your work and your thesis, and I'm curious to know, did you encounter any challenge regarding your emotions, anything challenging about working in that environment?
It was definitely really challenging, and I'm glad that it was challenging. I think I like being challenged, and I don't really shy away from difficult experiences or people. Sometimes there were behavioral problems. Sometimes there's substance like situations that we have to deal with. Sometimes there's family life stuff that the kids are going through and they tell us about and we have to deal with. I think it really just made me care a lot about the kids, and they would often say things that were incredibly deep and profound. And I just wanted to sort of broadcast how their experiences have shaped them and the sorts of things that they go through and what they think helps them rather than what other people think helps them. But yes, it was definitely really difficult.
Now that you're done with your thesis, looking back, is there any advice that you would want to give to yourself at the beginning? Like if you were to start over, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think part of it is just like reassurance for my past self. I think the first couple weeks of the thesis were probably the hardest because there was so much uncertainty and ambiguity, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was reading hundreds of academic papers trying to figure out how to orient my thesis and what direction to go in. And I think if I had known at the beginning that it was all going to turn out okay and that it wasn't going to be a total mess and completely incoherent, then I would have been a little bit less stressed. And also, I definitely was working on my thesis down to the wire because I'm a perfectionist and I wanted every part to be as good as it possibly could be. So I would just tell myself not to be such a perfectionist.
What was the outcome of your project?
I think my thesis turned out pretty great. It's sometimes hard for me to pat myself on the back, but I think this is something that I can say with a lot of certainty that I'm deeply proud of and that I did a great job on. I've actually applied to present it at a psychology conference next year, and it I think is going to be accepted because the theme of the conference this year is something about like towards a just future, repair and renewal. And that's all very much like language from my thesis. And my thesis actually ended up, I think, having some really important contributions to the literature because lots of people have looked at restorative justice and lots of people have looked at therapeutic horticulture, but not always in a juvenile jail setting, and especially not together. And part of my thesis was that when combining these two interventions into a dual intervention program, there's a possibility that their sense of community and belonging might be even more bolstered and boosted because of the unique aspects of each of these things acting on community.
What was the overarching question of your thesis? What were you trying to find?
I think just in a program that combines restorative justice and therapeutic horticulture, what is the relationship between youth's sense of belonging and their motivation or rehabilitation, or their confidence in the future and in themselves?
And what did you end up finding?
Well, I had 3 hypotheses. The first one was essentially that in the survey data, that belonging would predict sort of endorsement of restorative justice and how they felt about the future and like their confidence in themselves in the future. Like, can they get a job kind of thing? And that hypothesis was super, super significant. And then my second hypothesis, for some of the kids, I had 2 time points in the survey data. So I was hoping that their belonging would predict, or that their belonging would increase from time 1 to time 2. And it ended up being that I didn't have enough survey points for that to be significant because the sample size was pretty small, but I'm okay with that. But then my favorite part of the data was definitely the qualitative aspect, where I took a bunch of qualitative questionnaires and I did a thematic analysis, which basically entails you read a bunch of responses, you code it, and then you turn codes into themes. So I generated 6 themes. And I had hypothesized that belonging and restorative justice and future orientation would be central themes, and they all very much were, which was super, super exciting. I had a lot of doubts that I would actually find what I was hypothesizing, especially after some data was lost. But it was really exciting that it did come out well.
Could you give us some insight into why this is important? Why do you think it's important? And who has/will this impact?
Well, I think obviously there's a lot of things very globally that need changing about how we deal with the justice system, especially in the US, but sort of all over the world. Like putting kids in a garden is by no means a fix. I think that if my thesis is correct and this sort of programming helps kids to feel more community, hopefully desist from crime, or at least consider desisting from crime if they feel more motivated to get a job or go back to school or to stay in school, which my thesis does suggest just from the kids' words, then there's like a slight possibility that over time, fewer kids are going to be stuck in this cycle of incarceration or probation or just like stuck in the system. And I think research is important because it shows policymakers some sort of evidence that they can believe. So if this thesis in any way pushes more people or adds to the literature saying that these are good programs for youths to take part in, then my hope is just that it'll continue to be implemented, it'll get more funding than it currently has, and that more youths get this opportunity. Because in my experience, and according to the data, it works pretty dang well. And I wish that everyone could see firsthand, like I've been able to, how moved these kids are and how much just hanging out in a garden and tasting zucchini for the first time or planting a seed for the first time or making new friends who also want to stop committing crimes. Like if other people could see this, I think it would be very difficult to say that, wow, this doesn't work. But not everyone has the opportunity like I've had to hang out in the garden with juvenile delinquents. So hopefully people read my thesis and get to hear some of the kids' experiences in their own words.
Was there any particular story that stood out to you that you felt like a strong connection to?
One of my, I mean, not that I had favorites, but one of the kids who who I really, really connected with. He came in on the first day, I think a couple weeks into me working this job, and did not want to be there, wanted to fight everyone, was super not happy about being in a garden, was scared of dirt, was scared of bugs. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, she and I started connecting, and she started opening up a lot to me about her past and how she feels about herself. And she started getting kind of interested in gardening. And when we would take them out into the garden, my former boss and I would pick up bugs and give them little hand lenses to look at the bugs with. Like we'd take a grasshopper and they would look a grasshopper in the eye for the first time. And this one kid, she at first was absolutely terrified, did not want to get within a yard of the thing. And then after a little while got really, really inspired and started going around trying to pick up bugs and show them to everyone, started really loving them and got super into gardening and started saying all of these things without knowing what I was doing my thesis on, about how she feels a sense of belonging and she feels like this is her forever family and she feels community where everyone understands her like no one else has, and all sorts of really beautiful things. And now she's actually a peer mentor in the program after having gone through it a couple of times. And she used to say things like, I want to do this when I grow up. I want to be like you guys when I grow up. And now she's already doing that after less than a year. So that kid has really moved me and inspired me, but they all have.
How do you think your thesis experience will inform your life after Reed? And I mean, you've mentioned that it's an experience, at least working here as an intern, has changed your life. So I'm curious to know like what the thesis experience has done and how it will affect your future, your path.
I think in the doing the research for the introduction of my thesis made me really learn a lot about the history of the juvenile justice system and the statistics of like what's going on in the US right now with juvenile justice. And it really made me dig deep and learn so much about it and really care about doing something about it. And my internship ended in May. So this summer I've been waiting for a background check and a psych eval to clear, and it just cleared, thank goodness, to start a promotion also at the juvenile center. essentially as a counselor in training, but in the back of the detention, like in the jail itself. And the garden was not actually in the jail; it was directly outside of it. But now I'll be working behind the bars with the kids, and even though it's a different context, and there's not currently a garden back there, I don't think. I'm really excited to keep working with the kids. And I feel like I've learned a lot in the past year, both doing the internship that I just finished and also doing my thesis on it. And I feel like I'm really excited and ready to keep working with them. I don't really know everything yet because the job description was pretty vague, but I start training next week. And I think probably the biggest difference is that these are the kids who are in jail at that time. And the kids that I was working with were often not in jail. They were on parole, probation, diversion, or they were in the rehab facility. And we would sign them out of that to come be part of the program. But these kids are, I'd say, like a little bit higher caliber. They have often longer sentences or don't qualify because of their sentences for the garden program. So I think it'll be a little bit more difficult. And also, of course, it's incredibly difficult for them to be incarcerated and to see them be incarcerated. But again, I think they need a lot of help. So I'm excited to jump in and be there for them.
In 30 years, what will go through your mind when you read through your thesis?
I think in 30 years, I will definitely know a lot more than I know now. So I think I'll probably look back and be like, "Aw, I was doing pretty good, but I know a lot more now." Like, I think I'll see a lot of places where I could have done better or where I know more context about now or I have more ideas about. But I think my thesis in my head will always sort of be a work in progress. But really, I think I'll be proud of myself. Then I'll look back and think, wow, I was 22 and writing all of that and doing this kind of work. And I think I'll picture the kids all grown up. Like, as I know them now, they're between 14 and 18 years old. And in 30 years, they'll be actual adults. And hopefully they'll be out of the system. And it'll be cool to look back at it.
What advice do you have to listeners who are starting Read or who are barely starting their thesis?
I think if I've learned anything really impactful from my Read and thesis experience, it's the power of a healthy community and of communication and holding each other up instead of tearing each other down. So I'd say connect with each other. If you're first getting to read, like make some friends, connect with each other, be authentic. If you're struggling with your thesis, connect with people about your thesis. It helps so much. And just be kind to each other and think critically about cancel culture. I've thought a lot about how Reed treats cancel culture in the context of what I've learned about my thesis and how labeling people and relabeling people with rumors and gossip can sometimes be a lot more harmful to the community and also to everyone involved individually. I would just urge people to think critically about that. And if you hear that somebody has done something, don't make assumptions immediately and just think critically about what you're hearing. And yeah, believe that people can change and be better is kind of just my general take for Read. I think if I had any advice for like the thesis process, it would just be to keep yourself slightly organized. For me, at least, I had to do a lot of work with so many papers. So I had a bunch of Google Docs with all of these papers and like a shorthand note about like what each one was about and why it would be relevant and what part of my thesis I was going to put it in. And I found that to be super helpful. And also just like take care of yourself while you're thesising. Don't forget to sleep and eat and drink water and take breaks and connect with people. And don't be afraid to reach out. I had a lot of people helped me a lot with my thesis, whether that was just taking me on a walk so I could get some fresh air and like have a break, or helping me rephrase a sentence when I was super stuck. And also, I would just like to thank my thesis advisor, Jennifer, for all of her tremendous, tremendous help during the entire process and for believing in me enough to let me do sort of an unorthodox, ambitious thesis, and all of the community that helped me with the thesis at Multnomah County and at Reed, and my family and my friends, and especially the kids who have just completely inspired me and touched my soul, and my boss, Jerry, who I've dedicated the thesis to because he really deserves it. he really taught me so much about gardening and connecting with youths and mentoring them and restorative justice.
Is there anybody else that you'd like to thank?
I guess myself. It was difficult and I really made it work. And hopefully I'll keep making it work. I'm really looking forward to hopefully presenting this thesis at a conference, connecting with people who have similar interests and have done similar research. I think that would be really, really impactful for me.
I think that's the end of it. And thank you so much for letting me interview and for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really nice.
It was great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again, Rhiannon. I hope that you have continued to connect with the kids, no matter the setting. It seems you're all changed for good in the process. If you enjoyed today's interview, I hope you'll join us again to hear more from students and alumni about what it means to burn your draft. And be sure to subscribe, check out our X, Facebook, and Instagram pages, and write a review on Apple Podcasts. Burn Your Draft is a production of Reed College and the Center for Life Beyond Reed. Created jointly by students, alumni, and staff, this episode was produced and engineered by me, Reed College student Ace Lackey. Our executive producer is Seth Paskin, class of 1990, with technical advising from Joe Janica. Our project manager is Nate Martin, staff member and class of 2016. Music by Jack Salvucci, class of 2020, and podcast art by alumni Henry Gottschlich and Lillian Pham. This podcast was made possible by a gift from Seth Paskin.